A durable brand, in my opinion, is on the show side, you know what you're good at. You have to have a very specific thing that only you can do, or that you do it so much better than everybody else, it's no contest. And then tell those stories, right?
Hi, I'm Jason Harris, and you're listening to Soul and Science. Fast forward your marketing mind in about 20 minutes. Welcome to the podcast. Today I'm speaking with John Sullivan. He's the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Whoop, which is a wearable fitness tracker with a devoted fan base. I'm one of those fans, and an impressive list of celebrity ambassadors. John is a proponent of brand durability, and he has helped recenter Whoop from a niche software utilized by sports organizations like the New York Yankees to a wildly popular personal performance coach that you wear on your wrist. He joined me live at Advertising Week New York to talk about how to build a durable brand. And today we're sharing that conversation with all of you, our wonderful podcast listeners. On today's Soul and Science episode, you'll learn the two elements that constitute a durable brand. You'll learn how to use storytelling to sell a product that you can't always see, and you'll hear how Whoop is incorporating AI into their user experience. It's pretty badass. Let's get into it. Tell me a little bit about, you joined Whoop 6 years ago?
That's right, yeah.
So it must have been pretty small at the time. It's about, 11 years old?
Yeah, that's right. The company's 2012. It was founded out of the Harvard iLab.
And what made you want to, what did you see in Whoop that you thought it would be successful?
Yeah, it was very small. As a matter of fact, there was no consumer business at the time. It was started as a B2B SaaS platform. So it was basically a team of consultant physiologists and salespeople would direct sell into organizations like the Yankees or Penn State football. Great place for the business to cut its teeth, but wasn't scaling terribly well. So shortly before I joined, they launched a Shopify store, Whoop did, and put a $500 Whoop hardware purchase up for sale to just see what would happen. The ambition when I joined with part of a small team was to grow a direct-to-consumer business, which we've been up to for the last 6.5, 7 years.
So they would sell it B2B to the Yankees, for example. And was it the same product? Was it a wearable?
It was
performance tech?
It was the same product. And basically they would work with a strength and conditioning coach, and the team would sell a suitcase full of Whoops. And there is to this day as well an enterprise solution dashboard. And then the athletes would all wear it. They would be onboarded by the strength and conditioning coaches. And then the strength and conditioning coaches, along with the Whoop staff, would help them interpret their data. And then that staff would also work with the coaching staff to see who's ready to play a game, whether or not the practices and the training volume were modulating appropriately relative to the recovered status of the athletes. And so I always describe Whoop as surfers waiting in the water for the set to roll in. And Whoop had been thinking about recovery from a training modulation perspective among this elite athlete crew. And then all of a sudden, the industry as we know it for recovery and sleep and everything else came in behind us. And we were in the right place at the right time with a great product. So if you were selling to professional athletes and then you turned on, how long ago did you turn on the consumer side of it? 6.5 years ago. 6.5 years ago? And to answer your previous question about what it was that I saw in the brand, it was a wearable with a really distinctive point of view. I had come from Tracksmith, which the world was asking, why does the world need another running brand at the time? And sure enough, we found our niche because of the dedication to the craft of running. And I saw in Whoop a technology product that had a very, very sharp point of view that I thought the market would be ready for. And so when you turned on the consumer side and you had elite athletes wearing the product, did you get them to, like I know LeBron and Tiger and all those, super elite athletes use the product. Did you get them to endorse it so that you could sell it to consumers? That was the very tip of the spear initial playbook. Yeah, absolutely. We have almost exclusively never worked with an athlete or an ambassador who wasn't at least organically interested, reached out and said, I'd like to give this thing a try. And then we let them have it for some number of months, or had been on it for a sustained period of time ahead of that. The first move was, it's a little bit different than traditional ambassadorship insofar as, if you wear a Nike kit on a field, you're a billboard and everybody already knows what Nike is. For us, the challenge, even in using ambassadors, because you can't necessarily see it on their wrist when they're in when they're in competition, it was really engaging in the storytelling that comes with how they were applying it. And what's interesting is that while it might have been about modulating training volume in the early days, you hear a lot of this, I came for the sport and I stayed for the sleep type stuff. And so their individual personal interactions with the product were a lot more nuanced than, am I working out too hard or not enough?
And so would those athletes wear the product not just for training, but they'd wear it in game as well?
Yeah, and that was always a mixed bag. So in some cases, it was a process of getting on-field approval. So like the MLB, for example, was one of the earliest leagues to test and approve Whoop for on-field use. And then in other cases, it never was. And the athletes would put it someplace hidden under some athletic tape or maybe up on their upper arm, which has always been a cleared area. So it all depends on the sport and the league and the governing bodies.
Did you ever think of making it say Whoop really big on it so that you could get that on TV action?
Yes. We have this jacquarded version of it that we don't sell, that we're always trying to get our athletes to use. And it just says Whoop and, big sewn.
But they won't use it.
It depends on the status of the athlete. So a lot of the athletes that we call it Whoop in the wild. A lot of the ones that you might see in the course of wearing the product are not necessarily ambassadors to Whoop and therefore don't necessarily wear the brand well.
So can you give us quickly in like the elevator pitch how I know Whoop's all about unlocking your potential and it's about performance. Mm-hmm. How can you give us a quick rundown on how that works, what it measures?
Yeah, so Whoop, in broad strokes, recovery, strain, sleep, and stress, and to an extent, health as well. Those are the 5 pillars that you wake up every morning. It's basically a weather forecast for your body. In the earliest days, an athlete would use it to see whether they were too tired as a function of their training or whether they were in the green, as we say, which is kind of like 67% or better recovery. And that would indicate that they're ready to be their best. We've broadened the aperture a lot of what constitutes human performance, right? So now it's like artists, musicians, entertainers, academics, professionals, entrepreneurs, parents. It's really about being in the green to show up for whatever it is your objective is. And I really look at Whoop's goal as closing the gap between someone's performance and their potential. How we do that is we enable you to make behavioral changes that are sustainable. So it's kind of like the opposite of the fad diet or life hacking. It's measuring it so you can manage relative to all of the decisions that add up in a day. Working late, drinking that extra glass of wine or scotch, whatever the case may be, working out or choosing not to. And then the real sort of tip of the spear stuff around cold exposure, heat exposure, breath work, meditation. All of those decisions all get journaled in Whoop, either automatically through some number of mechanisms or manually through someone's own interest about the modalities that they deploy in their own life. And those decisions all add up to behavior change that hopefully get you closer to the green, whatever that objective is every day.
Why does my sleep always suck? Can you?
Could be.
It always says I need 9.5 hours of sleep.
6.5, 7 hours of sleep just isn't enough. So the big thing that everybody underestimates is sleep consistency. Your body, your circadian rhythm craves normalcy, right? Like we are all just animals whose brains and learning have adapted a lot faster than our bodies have. Your body wants you to go to bed with the sun and to wake up with the sun, whatever that looks like, right? So it doesn't have to always be that way. You can wear blue light blocking glasses to simulate the sun's going down and get rid of the screens and stuff like that. Stop working, an hour or two before you go to bed. Yeah. Drinking's a big one. Late meals are a big one. You want the room to be cool and dark, quiet. If you can't make it quiet, have white noise. My sleep was trash here last night. It turns out New York City's quieter at 6 o'clock in the morning than it is at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, makes sense.
So those are all things that you can control. I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier. If I wake up early, I have kids, I train in the morning. If I can get myself to quiet my brain and go back to sleep at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning and sleep for an extra hour and a half, my recovery goes from a 60 to a 90.
And that means you can take on more strain and stress during the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. You think more clearly, you feel better. I mean, I notice when I chase my kids, I feel less logy and tired.
You're a big fan of what you call durable brands. What constitutes a durable brand? in your mind?
The way that we talk about it on our team is basically two parts, the show and the tell. And you have to be equally good at both in order for the brand to be durable. I've been part of brands where we're really good at talking about what we do, but it doesn't come to life in ways that resonate. And I've been in places where we talk about, or we were able to show it in ways that are really emotive, and then you miss the elevator pitch. So a durable brand, in my opinion, is on the show side, you know what you're good at. You have to have a very specific thing that only you can do, or that you do it so much better than everybody else, it's no contest. And then tell those stories, right? So with Whoop, we have some of the best performers in the world. It doesn't mean just LeBron James or Michael Phelps. LeBron's not an ambassador, to be totally clear. But it could be Zed, the DJ. Zed is a prolific, profound user of Whoop. He's always taking photos and videos of himself working out because he just wants to be lively and have the energy on stage. So you've got to tell the stories that show that the things you do better than anybody else. But you have to be clear about how you describe it too. In the Whoop world, I think that modulating decisions in order to wake up with a great recovery, that's an abstraction relative to counting steps, for example. Right. It's more profound, but it's harder to wrap your head around. So we scrutinize our words endlessly to make sure that what we're saying that pairs with what we're showing hits a chord with the listener that pairs with the way they see themselves living their lives. So we tell great stories, but we have to be really, really clear about how we describe ourselves in ways that map to the mental map of the customer. And
so as a durable brand, what do you think you offer that no one else can offer?
We've always been really good at the showing, I think, right? And we're fortunate because we work with a fellow by the name Rich Roll, and every once in a while he'll write in. Rich is amazing. He's an amazing human. He's an amazing host. He's just one of the most thoughtful guys you'll meet. We're to the point.
Stopped partying when he was 40.
Yeah. I mean, he is the Whoop.
His book is great. Completely.
Yeah, he completely changed, and now he's plant-based and sober, and just one of the most thoughtful guys you'll meet. So when Rich writes into us and says, what is the read for the month? We're like, Rich, whatever you're doing is what we want you to talk about. And so they're not reads anymore. He's like, oh God, there's this new stress thing, and I had no idea when I get ready for a podcast, this is what I'm experiencing. It's a completely different ball of wax. What has been harder has been the tell part. And that's what you're asking, like, what do we do differently? And we are a human performance coach. That's the language that we have landed on. That maps exceedingly well to the way that people find value in a product, the things they tell us that they find value in. And we find that it is sufficiently differentiated from the competitive set in the market to be able to market to it and repeat that message over and over.
So we worked on a campaign called The Best Obsess, and it had some high-profile users in that campaign. How do you balance? You obviously have investors, and they want to see Whoop expand and grow, not just in awareness, but obviously in sales and customer base. How do you think about making this idea of human performance, the best obsess, how does it resonate with the average person?
Yeah,
maybe who is here at Advertising Week and works out 3 times a week and has a high pressure job. How do you expand the best obsess or unlocking potential to not just be about, high performers in the athletic sense, but the aperture to everyone? How do you do that?
Yeah, that tagline, the best obsessed, that campaign, which we've been running now for 8 or 9 months and will continue to for quite some time. For us, there's a tension in it that was perfectly appropriate for the tension that we represent. I always say that Whoop's not for everybody, but everybody can be on Whoop.
Yeah.
In the best obsess, it started with the most obvious obsessions, right? So Alex Honnold, if you've seen Free Solo, the guy whose amygdala apparently doesn't work. Michael Phelps, who was obsessed as an athlete, now is obsessed with his mental health. I mean, Michael Phelps had the line of the entire campaign where he said, if I had the emotional control of my younger self that I do today, what could I have accomplished? I would have been Aquaman. He's the most, the most.
He didn't accomplish enough.
Yeah, exactly. The most decorated Olympian in history. But there were two other characters in that campaign that were out of left field for Whoop. One of them was Melissa Urban, who's the founder of The Whole30, New York Times bestselling author, and Stephen Bartlett, who's an entrepreneur podcast host from the UK.
Speaker.
He's a guest judge within Dragon's Den as the UK version of Shark Tank. The way that we work at Whoop, and from a marketing and media mix point of view, is that we are very true to where we've always been. Most of our members take their health and their fitness very seriously. So like you said, they work out a few times a week. They've probably heard of Bulletproof Coffee. They probably listen to the Huberman podcast. Turns out a lot of people listen to the Huberman podcast, right?
Yeah.
But Melissa Urban is more of a holistic explorer, right? I mean, she's very spiritual, self-described as very spiritual. She's very focused on her diet and her, hiking. She's very focused on helping people. We identify those audiences and we test into them for signal. So we use advertising in those personas to see if the market will respond to that message in a way that often, like you said, the investors and the board and a lot of people within the four walls who will wish for us to be more expansive in the representation of performance. The definitions of performance are a very important dimension of inclusivity at Whoop. And so Melissa, with her kind of softer edges in the way she lives her life, relative to an Alex Honnold, represented new territory for us. It turns out that creative is among, depending on what you measure, some of the highest performing creative part of that entire portfolio of ambassadors. And so now we go back in to the board and to our investors and to the room, and we say, there's something there. So let's work on the features and the messaging and the personas and all of the ambassadors, and then wrap it around. It's like another ring of the onion relative to what has always been the core.
So you test into new markets for expansion, and then if you see something there, you'll go. Exactly. So do you, as a marketer, are you more soul and science? Do you look at the data to determine where you're going to go? Or do you really, because you've been there for a while, you know the company, and you play a little bit more with your gut in terms of what to do? Because obviously you guys aren't rocking, $50 million media budgets or $100 million media budgets. So do you have to really kind of scrutinize the data before you make a move? Or do you do some things that are more off the cuff?
It's the latter. So we start with our gut and then we validate with the science. I think it's, I've heard it described a couple different ways, but the way that we work at Whoop is more deductive than inductive. So we think we know what success looks like, and we run to that goal. And then we look at the data as we're running to make sure that it corroborates it, versus a more consulting type point of view. Like back in the day at the Monitor Group, you kind of start with all of the data. You try not to boil the ocean because you don't have the time or the resources to do so. And then you calibrate and you point towards that goal. The best, I listened to this interview years ago that stuck with me. It was with this fellow named Devin Hester, who was a punt returner and wide receiver for the Bears. Yeah. Arguably the best punt returner in history. The only man to have, individual to have returned the opening kick in a Super Bowl. For a touchdown. Yep. And Devin was asked in the course of an interview, you're the best ever punt returner, but you're like kind of a third string receiver. What's the disconnect? And he said that he knew as a punt returner that he needed to get to the end zone and he needed to see the open field and adapt to the open field in order to be his best, versus as a receiver, he had the specific play that he needed to run. And then if he ran it correctly, he would be in the end zone. Deductive versus inductive. He was a deductive athlete in the way he ran the football back. And I think that has really stuck with me from a marketing point of view. There's so much data. You can't boil the ocean. You have to start with what success looks like and then be quick to adapt to it, chase success or debunk failure. So have a clear goal and improvise your way there. Yeah, and just like Devin Hester. Yeah, and check the data. I mean, I don't know what kind of data Devin had on the field getting hit or not, but we have plenty. Describe a time when you had to make an unpopular decision
that you had to stick with that turned out to be successful in your organization? And people were like, nah, John, we're not going to do that. And you kind of stuck with it, and then there was a good outcome, or maybe a bad outcome. But when you had to make a decision that was not what the board wanted or not what your boss wanted.
Well, I mean, we already talked about it, but I will just hit on it briefly. The Best Obsessed campaign. That was like a wince moment for a lot of people in terms of how bold it was relative to where I think everybody thought we were heading. But realistically, and this is less a marketing answer and more of just a business strategy answer. Almost every decision we've made at Whoop that people still talk about were the hardest decisions to make. Not counting steps, not having a face on this thing, right? The amount of feedback from people is like, could you put a watch face on it? And we don't. The amount of people, could we count steps? And we don't. The decision to pivot away from a hardware model to a recurring revenue model or a subscription membership basis was probably the most controversial. We call it our Netflix moment when they stopped shipping DVDs, although that happened for a while thereafter, and focused instead on the membership. That decision, I mean, look, Apple allegedly spent $25 billion on R&D in 2022. How do you compete with that if you're Whoop, right? And there's 300 people in the entire building. The recurring revenue model, the subscription, the membership model, looked at through the eyes of the member, was probably the single most transformative decision that we ever made inside the four walls of Whoop. And I look at it like a stock incentive program for employees, where the idea is that you get compensated in cash and you get compensated in equity, and the equity is what keeps you there for the long haul and making sure that you make long-term decisions and grow with the company. With our membership model, we do R&D on the hardware side. We release new hardware every so often, but the real innovation comes on the software side of things. And with this drone on your wrist, we're able to release a breathtaking pace of new features. I mean, this year so far, stress monitor was real on-demand passive stress monitoring was the first of its kind. MSK Strength Builder, Strength Trainer, first wearable to allow you to calculate musculoskeletal strain passively from the body. And more recently, Whoop Coach, so the implementation of ChatGPT 4 into the core Whoop experience. All those things are made possible through the membership model. And it's just this mutually aligned incentive where we say, stick with us, and the hardware will come out every so often. But the real magic is in the software.
So I did notice about a month ago, the Coach popped up and it said, ask me anything, just like ChatGPT would. And you would say, why is my sleep so fucked up? Or, why is my recovery not where I want it to be? How did you, so obviously that has to be an AI question because we're at Advertising Week. You have to ask one.
Sure.
How did you decide you were going to implement that, and how did you know it would work and not, upset your core user? To put in that ask me anything coach?
Can't say that we knew that it would work, just like anything, right? We had that definition of what success would look like. That definition, so if Whoop is the human performance coach, most coaching relationships are really interactive, right? A coach will ask you, whether it's a nutritionist or a traditional coach, like your cycling coach, your football coach, a life coach, a professional coach, a therapist, they'll ask you what you want to achieve. They'll ask you a lot of questions about where you are in your journey. They'll make a plan for you. They'll check in with you on your plan and ask how it's going, and then they'll evaluate you relative to your goals. Whoop Coach can now help you do all those things in a more conversational manner. And the thing that I find most impactful about Coach is that we've had this sort of matrix of motivations on Whoop, where on the one hand, you've got people who want to be great athletes, they want to be great entertainers, they want to be great thinkers, they just want to live longer, they want to feel better. And they're all at different stages of it, right? From grasshopper to sensei. And Whoop Coach because you can interact with it in real time, it kind of short circuits all those things that you used to have to go find on the platform. You can just ask and we'll give you a thoughtful answer, and then we'll deep link you to a place in the app that shows you the data that measures you relative to your goals and also helps educate you.
So it kind of synthesizes your data for you without you having to do it.
Absolutely. It'll make a plan for you. It'll help correlate the unknown in your Whoop experience. It'll help compare you to other people if that's something you're interested in. You can even ask membership services for how to get a new battery pack if you lose it now.
As a marketer in the fitness and wellness space, what role do you think Whoop plays in the battle on sort of negative or positive body image?
Something that comes up a lot, obviously. The two things that I think we lend ourselves most importantly to in that conversation is, one, human performance is a measurement of your outcomes relative to your potential. And your potential is limitless and it's personal, right? Ours is completely different. Everybody in this room is different depending on what your motivation is. So we try to really focus on where you are in your journey. I mean, HRV, we always talk about it. Mine's trash. I don't know why. I think you said yours might be too. Whoop has done a lot to make me feel like that's okay. And I just make decisions every day to help make it better, right? I drink a little bit less, sleep a little bit more. I try to be more grateful for the things that I have in my life, my family, et cetera. So that's the first thing, is that it's all about your potential relative to your outcomes. The second thing is that the physical is really only one dimension of Whoop, right? I've said this 100 times, like whether you want to be an entertainer, a parent, a musician, an athlete, an academic, when we tell those stories, inclusivity and lack of a specific body image it's almost like strategic corporate responsibility in a way, where it's like, if it's so intrinsic to who you are, it's not even corporate responsibility anymore. It's just who you are. So when, whether we're telling a story about Gloria Gaynor, not an ambassador, but incredible artist, programming her set according to her Whoop recovery that day, because she knows what her strain looks like, and compare that, on the other hand, to Michael Phelps or Alex Honnold, who's doing 100 pull-ups in his van every night to get ready for the next day. The message is inclusive just by virtue of the inclusivity of the definitions of human performance.
So it's really about personal goals and personalization versus Whoop trying to make you measure against some, unattainable goal or some, and you don't really talk about physical appearance. You really talk about performance, mental and physical performance.
That's well said. And it's really, as we talked about earlier, it sounds cheesy, but it is the definition of the journey versus the destination, the behavior change and the decisions. It's less about what you look like and who you are at the end, so much as what you're doing today and how you feel about that.
Does John Sully have a mantra or a quote that kind of drives you as you're trying to build the Whoop business?
Doug Tompkins, founder of the North Face, Esprit, philanthropist, environmentalist, first a professional athlete, and then later one of the biggest preservers of land on earth. His mantra for his entire life was commit and figure it out. And that one really works for me.
Commit and figure it out.
Commit and figure it out.
Do you have a goal for Whoop, whether short-term or long-term, that is, driving you in the business? Like when do you feel like you maybe reached the potential of what Whoop can become?
Look at it two different ways. One, HRV, heart rate variability. It's kind of like the core of Whoop IP. If we can get HRV to the point where it's a household name, it's synonymous with your secret life force and all the decisions that you make leading up to it, I think that will be a point at which the conversation around human performance has made its way from the upper echelons of sport where it started to a place where everybody who's heard it is making better decisions to modulate against it.
So more people understanding HRV and having it affect them in better performance and better life.
It's like Palm Wonderful and antioxidants. I know there's some other stuff behind that, but if HRV is synonymous with secret life force, we've won.
Last question. How would you describe the John Sullivan business style in one word?
Optimistic.
Optimistic.
Yeah. You have to have a goldfish memory whether you woke up and things went great. What's that?
You mean no memory?
Yeah, like almost like Ted Lasso, I think popular is the goldfish memory, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad, every day is behind you, right? Because if it's a bad day, you have to have the optimism that you're going to dramatically or completely change your fate the next day. If it's a good day, then you'll, again, have to have that goldfish memory to rip up that playbook from the day before. Don't take it for granted and do it again. In either case, it's optimism and enthusiasm for what's going to come in the day ahead.
I love that. All right. Well, that's it. Thanks, John Sullivan, for being here. And thank you guys for learning more about Whoop.
Thanks for being here.
And how to market.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. Have a good advertising week, everyone.
Thank you.
Soul and Science is a Mekanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, Tyler Nielsen, Emma Swanson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.